Hello and welcome to the Christopher Hall Training Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be suggesting a better way to build core strength and spine stability. So let's get into it. I've broken this episode up into three parts. First of all, we're going to explain spine stability and core strength, find out what they are, try and get some degree of definition as to what they are, and then what we can basically do on the top of those definitions is in part two we're going to have a better understanding of what not to do, and then in part three that should then give us all the information we need to understand what we need to do, and I'll explain some of the science, if you will, behind all of it. So part one, sort of section one, if you will. What is spine stability? Now, with regards to spine stability, I'm going to be talking about the lumbar spine. And the reason I'm going to be talking about the lumbar spine is that's where the low back is, number one. But also the thoracic spine has a skeletal structure that gives it stability. So it has the rib cage. So the rib cage is obviously bone, which attaches to all the way up the thoracic spine, and that gives it a degree of stability. So the muscular function for thoracic spine stability is partly there because of the bones, and then the muscles don't have to do as much work with regards to stability. But when it comes to the lower back, obviously there are no bones holding the vertebra in place. So the stability comes from the muscles that attach to the vertebra, because we've got the pelvis at the bottom, and then you've got S1, which is kind of or S1L5, which is the junction between the sacrum and the pelvis, and then the lumbar spine. So when we're talking about spine stability, we're talking about the 5 lumbar vertebrae, because there are no bony attachments. It is just the muscles. So there are some sort of muscles that directly attach to it. So you've got multifidus. Now, multifidus generally gets talked about as one muscle, but it is many small muscles that attach each segment all the way up. Then you have quadratus lumborum, which attaches to all 5 lumbar vertebrae, the bottom of the rib cage, and the top of the pelvis. So that has a major spine stabilizing effect. Then you have transverse abdominis, which essentially wraps all the way around the torso. Again, that plays its role. It's been over exaggerated, and its role has been over exaggerated. It does play a role, and there is an importance to it, but it's not of the importance that it's been given, in that it's just one player in the game. It's not a major player in the game. There are other players that are more major in the game, the QL being one of them. You've then got longissimus and iliocostalis. Although they don't directly attach onto the spine, they do attach into the thoracolumbar fascia, which attaches to the spine, and that gives a stabilizing effect to the lumbar spine as well. Then you have latissimus dorsi, which again attaches into the thoracolumbar fascia, which then directly attaches into the lumbar spine. So what we're looking at is all of these muscles on both sides of the body. They need to activate at the right time to hold the 5 lumbar vertebrae in place. And if we can think of it like a sail on a boat or a mast on a boat, with all of the wires that come off the sail, and we have to tension them and release them as the boat is moving and changes direction. That's exactly what these muscles are doing. They're never completely slack, and they're never completely taut. They are always constantly heightening their activation and lessening their activation. But what does need to happen, just like on the mast of a sail on a boat, is it needs to be tightened at the right time, and it needs to be loosened at the right time. And that's what stability is. So first of all, we need the muscles to be able to time properly, to hold the spine in place. So as we change posture, change position, change direction of the body, those muscles are tuning in and timed and tightening and heightening their activation at the right time. Because if they don't, that's going to cause instability in the area, and then that's where spasms can take place, so on and so forth. And if there has been injury to a disc, so if there is some laxity in a disc, then there is more instability between lumbar segments, so L5, S1, L5, L4, L4, L3, whatever it may be. If there is some laxity there, or if there is some slack in the ligament because it's been overstretched or whatever, then there's going to be additional instability in the lumbar spine. So that's what we have to create with that muscle activation. It has to hold those 5 vertebrae in place to maintain that spine stability. So that is what I'm talking about when it comes to spine stability. When it comes to core strength, and what we have to understand is what core strength is, which is the ability to tolerate load. So first of all, we have to get the muscles timing and turning on at the right time. Then we have to get them to an ability to bear load and tolerate greater load. Now, core strength isn't even step 2 in this. So spine stability would be step 1. Core strength would be further down the line. So it might be step 3 or step 4. There is a step in between that, which is core endurance. So we need the spine stability, we need the muscles to activate at the right time, we need core endurance for them to be able to do that for a period of time. Then we can start adding strength into the mix once they can do things for a long time, and then we can start getting them to bear more load. Because if they can bear load once, but they can't do it 50 times, then we've got a problem, or then we're going to have a problem. So the core strength is the ability of your core muscles to tolerate load. And by core muscles, I'm talking about the ones that I've mentioned, plus rectus abdominis, internal, external obliques, so on and so forth. So there are muscles there to do it. When we're talking about core strength, we're more talking about, let's just say, fitness and performance. When we're talking about health of the core and health of the spine, core strength is sort of in the mix, but it's a bit further on. You may start to build it, but it's a bit further on. So what the advantages of core strength are is, again, the ability to bear load, but you aren't going to be bearing load unless you're in a more fitness and performance environment, or if your job requires you to lift heavy things, but even the core stability and the core endurance needs to come into that, because if it's a job where you have to lift heavy things, then you need to be able to have the endurance to be able to do that over a period of time because it's your job. So what we are talking about when it comes to core strength is the ability of the muscles basically to compress around the spine. So we've got the muscles timing in the right way. Now they're starting to compress around the spine to hold it in place. So as the load gets greater, the muscles need to be able to hold the spine in place to match that ever greater load. So we've got the stability there, they're timing at the right time. Then we need to put the ability to bear that load into it, which is where core strength comes from. And there's a very important point that I want to make here, because it's going to become more apparent when we talk about what not to do and what to do, which is this thing called hoop stresses. Now, hoop stresses are, if you can imagine like an old sort of wooden barrel, beer barrel or whiskey barrel or something like that, and it's got the planks of wood, and then it's got those metal sort of hoops that hold it together. Well, the hoop stress is the pressure or the force being exerted on the wood and on those sort of metal hoops that go around it and hold the barrel in place. That's what hoop stresses are within our core. So we've got an intra-abdominal pressure, which is pushing out, And then we've got the ability of the muscles to hold all of that intra-abdominal pressure in. And the force that's generated is known as a hoop stress. So that greater hoop stresses require greater strength to hold it all in place, because there's going to be a greater intra-abdominal pressure. Therefore, there's going to be greater hoop stresses. And that's where core strength comes in. And I won't add any more to that. I'll start to talk more about that when we get into parts 2 and part 3. So for now, just to quickly summarize part 1, spine stability is the ability of the muscles around the spine to heighten their activity at the right time to be able to hold the 5 lumbar vertebrae in place. Then we have, which we haven't talked about, which is core endurance, but not a lot of people talk about it. We need that to be able to maintain that activity over a period of time. Then we need the core strength to be able to bear the load, to manage the hoop stresses, to be able to hold everything in place. With regards to the intra-abdominal pressure that's pushing out, we need that force of the muscles to push in, and the hoop stress is there to be managed by those muscles. So what we're going to talk about next is what not to do. So what doesn't build core strength and spine stability? Well, for the want of a better way of describing it, it's spine bending exercises. So side bends, twists, crunches, sit-ups. You may well get muscle activation out of them, but that's not building the core. What has been misunderstood is the ability, not necessarily, no, not the ability, is by training individual muscles, the perception is that they come together. And if we have if we work these individual muscles and make them strong, then as a collective, they are strong. That's not always the case. Core training is very different to that. This idea of training the QL with side bends, or training the obliques with twists, and training the abdominals with crunches, this is born out of, it doesn't come from bodybuilding, but it comes out of the bodybuilding idea of breaking the body down into muscles and training them individually. The muscles of the core don't work like the muscles of the limbs. The biceps, the triceps, the quads, the hamstrings. So we have to train them differently. The muscles of the limbs, they are designed to produce high force and movement. The muscles that surround the spine aren't designed for high force. They are designed to be one unit. Now, what I always have to say here, because you get all the movement specialists jump on and say your spine should move, your spine this, you should move your, and I agree, your spine can move. That I do agree with. But when it's under high load, it's not terribly advantageous, and that's a different episode, where I would include something called stress concentrations, which go through the spine, which is another term that hasn't been brought into the health and fitness industry as much as it should be. So it comes from bodybuilding. The muscles of the core aren't designed for high force, so they need to be trained differently. They need to be trained as one unit for them to be strong as one unit. They need to be trained in different planes of movement, which requires moving forwards and backwards, moving sideways, rotating, sort of rotational movements, diagonally rotating, so on and so forth. Because it's that what brings these muscles together, not abdominal crunches or side bends or twists. Because we don't twist, again, under high load, we don't twist from the spine, we twist from the hips and the shoulders. Because again, they are the joints with the powerful muscles around them to be able to do that. And the spine is there, the muscles of the core are there to transfer that load through the torso not to bear it, if that makes sense. So there's nothing wrong with bodybuilding if that's the goal. Certainly of the limbs. So if you're looking to get bigger arms and bigger legs, bodybuilding is perfect, and that's the training you should do. Because again, there are a lot of influential accounts out there that demonstrate a body doing a certain type of exercise, and it's clear that that type of exercise didn't give them that body, because it's not bodybuilding. So bodybuilding is what creates a muscular physique, if you will, not most other types of training. So there is a place for bodybuilding. It just needs to be done for the right person at the right time. So what we have to understand is what proper core training is. So we've gone through a lot of stuff that it isn't. And it isn't breaking the body down into its constituent parts, into its individual muscles, and then training those muscles, because that can give you more problems than solutions, if you will. So we have to think about it in a completely different way, and that's what we're going to start doing in part 3. Hopefully now you've got a bit of a better lay of the land as to what I'm going to be talking about next, and hopefully, because I've laid some context down, and again, context is something that gets left out of a lot of influential social media accounts and the health and fitness industry in general. There's a lot of science being flown around, and everyone says the science says this and the science says that, and you should do more reading on this and you should do more reading on that, and that's fine. But as you dig down into it and you start understanding context, you start understanding where the pieces of this health and fitness puzzle should be laid. And hopefully I've started to lay some of those pieces out, and what I'm going to try and do now is sort of bring it together a little bit more. So how do you build core strength and spine stability, as I've described? Well, in part 1, I started laying out a simple process, which is we start with stability and endurance. So we need to be able to get the muscles timing at the right time. So to heighten their activation at the right time. Because when we take a step to the side, when we take a hinge forward, whatever it may be, different muscles are going to be working at different times. So when we hinge forward, it's going to be more erector spinae type of group, longissimus, iliocostalis. When we move sideways, it's going to be maybe iliocostalis and longissimus on the right side if we step to the right, with QL as well. And then when we step to the left, it's going to switch to the other side of the body. Walking is another example. When we walk, glute medius, glute minimus will work on one, or will heighten their activity on one side along with QL. And then when we take another step, the other side will work. So we have to understand there is this timing of muscles that goes on. But if we bring it back to core training and to stabilize the spine, we need to get the muscles working, so we need to train the different sides. So as an example, if we take the side plank, because what we can do with the side plank is take you through different progressions which highlight how you would go about it. Now, the side plank is just one exercise. There are many exercises, and the core needs many exercises because it needs rotation, it needs sideways movement, it needs forwards and backwards movement. But what it also needs is it needs a sideways movement into a rotation. It needs a forward movement into a rotation. It needs a forward movement into a sideways movement, because it's that change in direction that develops the core and develops the torso. So with regards to, if we just talk about purely spine stability, if we were to go into a half knee, I'm going to talk about the side plank in a second, but if we just purely talk about spine stability now, if we go on to one knee and we have one foot in front of, so we've got the knee back and we've got one foot in front, and we have a wide stance, so we've got a wide base. That's a high stability position. As we start to bring our foot in front of our knee and we start to work a bit more on a tightrope, then we start creating an unstable environment, and the muscles have to time to be able to maintain our balance. People are wobbly because opposing muscles are sort of turning on and turning off, or heightening and dampening their activation. And the more that they heighten and dampen is the amount that we wobble. When they are very tuned into each other and they aren't really heightening and dampening, that's when you have that sort of upright, stable position. So for a purely spine stability perspective, that would be an exercise that can be started with. If we then start to bring in endurance into that, now we can start looking at the side plank, because we can start looking at the ability of the muscles to time, because we can go onto one side. We can come up into the plank so they switch on at the right time, and then we can hold that for a period of time. And that would be our endurance. Now, there is a low level strength there, because what I'm going to say is we start in a side plank on the knees. So we're in sort of that half side plank position. So there's a low strength to it, but we can start to build in high endurance, and we've got the stability on one side. Then we swap to the other side, and we basically do the opposite. So we do the high stability, high endurance with an element of low strength in there as well. Obviously, when we become competent at that, so we take that up to, say, a minute side plank on either side, or 30 seconds side plank on either side. What we can then do is take that side plank up onto the feet, and we can do exactly the same. So we've got the stability aspect, we've got the endurance aspect, and we've got a higher strength aspect, because our core needs to be able to bear more load because we've got a greater lever. What we can then do with the side plank is then add in a leg lift. So whether you put your feet on top of each other in the side plank, or whether you put one foot in front of the other in the side plank, basically what you can do is lift one foot from the floor and then place it back down. So what that requires is, obviously, it needs the endurance, it needs the stability, and it needs a degree of strength. When we lift the foot, it requires the muscles on the underside of the body to heighten their activity. So if you're in a side plank and you go to lift your foot off and then place it down on the floor and your hips drop, that shows that glute medius and glute minimus aren't timing at the right time, and it isn't holding your pelvis up. If you just collapse to the floor, then you just don't have the strength for it. But if your hips drop and then stabilize, the muscles don't turn on at the right time, and then they do. So what we need to be able to do is then lift that foot up and maintain a level pelvis, because what that does, that then gives us, it gives us the stability and a heightened stability. It gives us greater strength, and it maintains our endurance as well. What we can then do with the side plank, take it another step on, is add rotation to it. So we can start up in the side plank, and then we can roll down into what would be a plank position, but we don't put the arm down. You could then do that. You can put the arm down, raise the other arm up, and then come up into a side plank the other side. So again, what you're doing with this exercise, if we just take the rotation part of it, what you're then doing is you're taking the side plank, which is heightening the activity on the whole sort of lateral aspect of the body. So glute medius, glute minimus, all the way down through the IT band, internal, external obliques, QL, longissimus, iliocostalis on that side, potentially latissimus dorsi on that side. And then what you're doing is, as you roll from that side position over into the plank position, the tension will then move from the absolute lateral part, and it will move towards the rectus abdominis. So it will move to the anterior part of internal and external obliques into the rectus abdominis. If you then roll back into the side plank, it will then go back. This is how you start to integrate these muscles. So if you're just training abdominals, you'll get strong abdominals. If you just train obliques, you'll get strong obliques, but it doesn't mean that you can hold the whole position all the way around. I've seen this many, many a time. I get plenty of people that I work with. They've been doing sit-ups for a long time. They've been doing side bends for a long time. But you ask them to go into a side plank and lift a leg up, they can't hold it. You ask them to go into a side plank and roll down into a side plank, they can't do it. Or they find it very difficult to do. So it's about bringing all of this together into one system. So although it's an incomplete sort of way to build core strength and core stability, what this idea should give you is an insight into some of the principles of core training and how to build it. Because as I mentioned with regards to hoop stresses, you've got the force that's pushing out, and again that force isn't uniform, let's say. It does change as we change. So as we change posture, as we change position, as we go through different movements, the stresses on the spine and the stresses around the abdominals change with that. And that's what we have to bring together with our exercise. So with that bodybuilding idea, it doesn't necessarily do that. With proper core training, you start to integrate all these muscles together and make them one unit. And that is how we go about building the core up, and essentially from the ground up with that stability. So obviously beginners, it's an easy process. You start them at the beginning and you work them through. And then as my course does in 16 weeks, it takes you from a beginner level all the way up to an advanced level. If you've got someone who's been into fitness for a long time, there's one of two types of people. They either do their own thing and I don't know what I'm talking about, and they just continue doing their own thing, or there are people like, oh, I'm understanding this, I'm seeing some relevance to this. So what they then have to do is understand, if you can imagine like all these different components, oh, I've got great strength, but I haven't got great stability, so I need to build up my stability. Or I've got great endurance, but I haven't got very good strength, so I need to build up my strength. So with people that are in fitness, you start to see there's little holes in their fitness that they can be plugged. With a beginner, it's just building up everything. So that's what my 16-week course is designed to do. But hopefully, it just gives you a better insight into what core training looks like and what's required of core training to be able to do it properly and be able to get the most from it. So hopefully that's given you a better idea of what core training is. Hopefully it's given you a better insight into the industry and what other people are saying about core exercise and different core exercises and things like that. So many thanks for watching. Hopefully this episode has been helpful for you. Hopefully it's given you some insight. If you've enjoyed the content, hit the like button. If you want to watch more like this, hit the subscribe button. If you've got any questions or comments, please do leave them down below. So many thanks for watching. I'll speak to you in the next episode.